I took a bus to a town no one knew me, unaware the Mafia boss was waiting there. The bus hissed to a stop in Bellwether just after dawn, and I saw him before I saw the station sign. He stood alone on the cracked sidewalk in a dark wool coat, one hand resting on a cane he did not seem to need, as steady as a courthouse statue and twice as severe. I had never been to that Pennsylvania town in my life, yet the first words he spoke through the fogged glass were, "Elise Harper, you're late. The driver took the river road." I should have stayed in my seat. I had left Chicago with one suitcase, my drafting tube, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into a woman's bones when grief has lived there for years. I took that bus because Bellwether was supposed to be the first place where nobody knew my face, my history, or the sound of my mother coughing through the wall at 2 a.m. Then the door opened, and a stranger already knew my name. He was 55, maybe older around the eyes, with silver at his temples and the stillness of a man used to being obeyed before he raised his voice. The driver set my suitcase on the curb, and the stranger lifted it as if he had every right. "Mr. Sorelli," the driver said with nervous cheer, "she's all yours." I did not know who Victor Sorelli was yet, but I understood at once that in Bellwether, other people did. If you can already feel how wrong that was, stay with me. And if stories like this are your kind of trouble, like this video and subscribe, because that bus ride was the last ordinary thing that happened to me for a very long time. I stepped down onto the pavement and kept my hand on my bag. "You have the advantage," I told him. "You know my name, and I have no idea who you are." He looked at me with dark eyes that missed nothing. "I'm the man who owns half the buildings in this town and funded the restoration job you accepted," he said. "And you look tired enough to fall where you stand, so I thought I would meet the bus myself." It was not an answer. It was a rearrangement of the question. I followed him only because there was nowhere graceful to go. Bellwether Station was little more than a brick shelter, a bench, and a map faded white by weather. His car waited at the curb, black and understated. He loaded my suitcase, opened the passenger door, and said, "I know you dislike feeling indebted. You can pay me back by telling me if the heater in the hotel office fails again." My hand froze on the door. I had not mentioned the hotel office to anyone. For the first 10 miles, I considered making him stop and leaving me on the roadside with my suitcase like a fool. Instead, I watched the town arrive in pieces through the windshield. A hardware store, a church steeple, bare maples combing the gray sky, and the old Bellwether Lake Hotel above the water like a grand woman whose dress had gone out of fashion but whose posture remained perfect. I had come there to save that building from becoming an expensive lie. I had not come to be expected. Chicago had stopped feeling like a city and started feeling like a long goodbye. For nearly 4 years, my life had narrowed to pill organizers, insurance calls, damp washcloths, and listening for my mother's breathing from the next room. My fiancé left 18 months before she died because he said love should not require so much rearranging. By the time I buried her, I no longer trusted any future that asked me to disappear inside it. Bellwether was supposed to be work, not destiny, and certainly not a man waiting at my bus. Victor drove without small talk. When we reached the hotel, morning light was breaking over the lake in a weak silver band, and the old windows threw it back in fractured pieces. I loved the place instantly. The porch columns leaned. The brass railings were green with age. The bones were still proud. Before I could say a word, Victor studied my face and said, "You're relieved. Good. I was afraid you'd want to gut it and turn it into something glossy and cruel." That was exactly what I had spent the ride promising myself I would not do. "Do you always talk to strangers as if you've been reading over their shoulder?" I asked. A shadow of amusement touched his mouth. "Only when they come here to save things people richer than them never learned how to value." Then he took my suitcase into the lobby, as if he already knew I would follow. I hated how much that bothered me. I hated even more that beneath the irritation, there was a dangerous thread of curiosity beginning to pull tight. My apartment sat above the kitchen on the third floor, modest and clean, with a narrow bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking the lake. By noon, I had met Margaret Dwyer, a retired librarian with a blue raincoat and an elderly terrier named Pip. I also met Gus, the maintenance man, who spoke to boilers as if they had feelings, and Teresa Sorelli, Victor's older sister, who moved through the hotel offices with the calm authority of someone who had been solving other people's problems for decades. She embraced me lightly and said, "We're grateful you came." Unlike her brother, she smiled easily. That should have comforted me. It did not. There was something about both Sorellis that made a woman feel observed before she felt welcomed. That afternoon, I walked the property with my clipboard, making notes on the veranda flooring, the warped window frames, the inaccessible front steps, and the criminal waste of replacing original oak paneling with synthetic nonsense. Victor appeared beside me as silently as weather. "The investors want a porte cochere for luxury arrivals," he said. I answered without looking at him. "Then your investors are fools. The front walk belongs to older residents with canes and walkers, not to men who enjoy watching themselves step out of expensive cars." He was quiet so long I wondered if I had just insulted the town's most powerful man on my first day. Instead, he said, "That is the correct answer." When I turned, he was watching the front steps, not me. "My late wife used those steps with a cane near the end," he added. "I will not have them rebuilt for vanity." Something changed in the air between us, a door opening one careful inch. I wrote accessible grading, better rail height, heated stone for winter in my notes. He glanced at the page and said, almost too softly to hear, "Yes, exactly that." Again, he had arrived at my thoughts before my words. In the weeks that followed, Bellwether introduced itself the way old towns do, through repetition and witness. I learned who opened shops late because of arthritis, which widowers gathered outside the bakery for coffee, and why everyone lowered their voices when Victor Sorelli crossed a room. He was never loud. Men moved for him before he asked. Conversations bent around him, yet I kept seeing small things no one mentioned when they called him dangerous. One morning I watched Margaret fumble with her purse outside the pharmacy, while the owner, red-faced and embarrassed, explained he could not keep extending credit. Before I could step in, Victor emerged from nowhere, handed the pharmacist an envelope and said, "You've been paid." Margaret protested at once. Victor silenced her with a look gentler than his reputation allowed. "Your late husband fixed my father's roof for free in the winter of 1979, he said. He replaced the broken side steps with a graded walkway and pretended it had been the contractor's idea. Decaffeinated tea began appearing in my office cabinet. Then came the cardinals. I was reviewing tile samples one morning when I noticed a wooden feeder newly attached beneath my office window. Scarlet flashes dipped in and out of it, bright against the bare branches. I stared so long I forgot the papers in my hand. Victor was in the courtyard below talking to Gus. He looked up once and nodded. I went down to him at once. "How did you know?" I asked. "Know what?" he said, too evenly. "That my mother loved cardinals, that I stop whatever I'm doing when I see one." He held my gaze a second too long. "It was a guess," he said. "People who have lost someone often look for small red miracles in winter." It was a beautiful answer, and I almost let myself believe it. Almost. But something in me tightened. Victor had a way of being right about me that felt less like intuition and more like memory. His darker side revealed itself before Christmas. A man named Lasco had been buying unpaid heating oil contracts from elderly residents for pennies, and then threatening to strip their furnaces when they missed inflated payments. Margaret brought me the story because she knew I had Victor's ear, though I had never admitted such a thing. When I told Victor what was happening, he asked only for names and addresses. "Don't break his legs," I said, trying for humor and failing. Victor's expression never changed. "No," he said. "Legs heal." The next day, Lasco's office was closed. His trucks were seized for code violations, and his landlord suddenly remembered years of lease breaches. By evening, he was on the hotel porch, hat crushed in both hands, signing documents that restored every contract he had stolen and canceled the balances of residents over 75. I stood near the front desk and watched Victor witness the signatures without once raising his voice. Lasco looked as if he had seen the edge of the grave. That frightened me more than shouting would have. When the man left, I followed Victor into the side hall. "You ruined him," I said. He adjusted the cuff of his coat with perfect calm. "I redirected him." "People are terrified of you." "Some should be." His eyes settled on mine. "What matters is whether you are." I could have lied. Instead, I told the truth. "I am when I think about what you could do. I'm not when I think about what you choose not to do." I watched all of that before I ever let myself imagine his hand closing around mine, and that order matters. I did not fall for danger. I fell for evidence. On the anniversary of Cecilia Sorelli's death, I found him alone in the back pew at St. Anne's, not praying so much as holding still inside the dim churchlight. I would have retreated, but he heard me and said, "You're not interrupting." The stained glass laid red and blue across his face, making him look briefly less like a man and more like a confession. "Teresa told me today was hard," I said. He nodded. "My wife hated fuss. The town gives it to me anyway." His hand rested on the polished wood before him. "Grief makes people noisy." I sat one pew behind him because it felt like the respectful distance. "My mother hated lilies," I said after a moment. "Everyone sent lilies." That made him look back at me. There was no smile, only recognition. "Cecilia hated people saying she was brave," he said, as if illness were theater and courage a costume. We stayed there a long time after that, trading small truths in the church hush, and when we finally stepped outside, snow had started falling in slow flakes. He put my gloves into my hands before I realized I had forgotten them inside. A week later, Margaret invited me to Victor's house under the harmless pretense of choosing salvageable furniture for the hotel parlor. The house stood outside town behind old stone walls and bare rose canes, large without being vulgar. Victor showed me through rooms that had not been redecorated in years. Cecilia's presence remained there, not as a shrine, but as a fact. In the back garden, he stopped beside a rectangular plot bordered with winter-killed rosemary. "She planted that," he said. "I keep meaning to hire someone to restore it." I surprised both of us by answering, "You don't want someone. You want time." His eyes lifted slowly to my face. "Yes," he said at last. That afternoon, I saw the man beneath the reputation with painful clarity. I was working too many hours, skipping meals, and pretending fatigue was a personality trait. One afternoon, I stood up from a crawlspace inspection, and the whole room tilted. The next thing I remember clearly is waking in my apartment with cool cloths at my wrists, broth on the table, and Margaret knitting in the chair by the window. "Don't look so alarmed," she said. "Victor sent a doctor, not a priest." I tried to sit up too fast and regretted it instantly. "You told him?" I asked. Margaret snorted. "Child, nobody had to tell Victor. That man notices when the wind changes direction over this hotel." She patted my knee and lowered her voice. "He didn't come upstairs. Said you valued privacy, and he would not repay your trust with intrusion." That sentence undid me in a way illness had not. Every important man in my earlier life had believed access was proof of care. Victor arranged what I needed and then stopped at the boundary. It was the first time help did not feel like being quietly claimed. When I was strong enough to go down, I found him in the deserted dining room reviewing invoices. He rose at once, but he did not move closer. "Dr. Levin says exhaustion and a touch of pneumonia," he said. "You'll be angry that I had the kitchen send soup to your room for 3 days. Be angry when you're finished recovering." I should have laughed. Instead, I felt tears threaten, so I crossed my arms and said, "You are intolerably certain." His gaze softened. "No," he said. "Only where you are concerned." I sat across from him because my knees still felt unreliable. "Why?" I asked. It was the most dangerous question I had put to him yet. He looked down at the papers, squared them, and bought himself a second. "Because when you arrived," he said finally, "this place began sounding less like business and more like life." He seemed almost annoyed by his own honesty. "And because you look after old buildings the way some people look after frightened animals, patiently, without needing applause." No man had ever described me more accurately. It was during one of those library mornings that I asked him the question half the town wanted answered. "Did you ever love Cecilia less because she became dependent on you?" The room held very still after that. Victor set down his cup with exquisite care. "No," he said. "I loved her differently in illness, because love that has not yet been tested is mostly theory." His eyes met mine. Dependence was never the tragedy. Her pain was. Then, before I could retreat, he added, "If anyone taught you otherwise, they were unworthy of being believed." I did not tell him then about the fiancé who resented my mother's needs, or about the humiliations that teach a woman to apologize for taking up room. I told him later, walking the snowy edge of the lake in boots that leaked. He listened without interruption, without turning my words into lessons about my strength, and without offering immediate vengeance on a man he had never met. When I finished, he said only, "He made caregiving sound like weakness because he feared being measured and found wanting." I nearly stopped walking. He was right. By February, companionship had become its own weather between us. Victor would arrive with a broken brass fixture and leave with me laughing. I would go to his house to review furniture for the hotel and stay to help plan the spring garden. Pip began following him and me together as if even the dog had decided the matter before I had. The first time his hand settled at the small of my back as we crossed an icy patch, nothing dramatic happened outwardly. Inside me, however, a locked room opened. Our first kiss came in the greenhouse behind his house, which had not been used properly in years. Snow tapped softly at the glass while we sorted seed catalogs on an old bench. He looked at me for a long time after I made some impatient joke about antique men with secret empires and strong opinions on heirloom tomatoes. "Elise," he said, my name so low it felt almost private. "I am trying very hard not to rush something I have no right to rush." My answer was to kiss him first. He kissed like everything else he did, with restraint that made the feeling behind it stronger, not weaker. One hand rose to my cheek and stayed there, as if asking permission even after it had been granted. When we broke apart, I could hear my own heartbeat. "That was a terrible abuse of your patience," I said, because I could think of nothing sane. His mouth moved in the smallest, rarest smile. "On the contrary," he said, "it may be the first time patience has ever rewarded me." "Because of me?" I asked one night as we stood on his back steps under a sky hard with stars. He considered the question. "No," he said, "because of who I am when I am with you. I find the rest of my life less tolerable." Then, after a pause, "You should know I will never promise sainthood. I only know I no longer want to spend my remaining years surrounded by men who mistake fear for respect." That answer mattered more than any vow of total reinvention could have. He was not offering fantasy, he was offering movement. And still, beneath all the tenderness, that original mystery kept breathing. He knew when my shoulder ached from old strain before I admitted it. He remembered I hated chamomile. He once left a used book copy of Gilead on my desk because, he said, the town library's waiting list is absurd. I had never told him that novel was one of the few I reread when life became too loud. Together, those small acts formed a pattern I could no longer call chance. The moment that finally cracked the surface came in early March. We were in the hotel library after closing, and I had been telling him about the strange relief of hearing silence that felt peaceful rather than lonely for the first time in years. He went very still. Then he said, not looking at me, "You wrote that once." A cold current moved through me so fast I actually set my glass down before it fell. "Wrote what?" I asked. He lifted his head slowly and understood his mistake too late. "Nothing," he said. That was the wrong answer. I stood up from the sofa. "Victor." The room seemed suddenly sharper at every edge. "You just said I wrote that once." He rose as well, but unlike other men I had known, he did not step toward me to manage my reaction. "Elise," he said quietly, "I should have told you something earlier." I waited. He did not continue. For the first time since that frozen bus platform, I felt genuinely afraid of what sat beneath his knowledge of me. Before he could speak again, the library door opened, and Teresa stood there with a document box in both hands. She looked from him to me and seemed to understand the exact second she had walked into. "Perhaps," she said with terrible calm, "this has arrived sooner than I hoped." My body went cold. Victor's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but dread with history behind it. Teresa set the box on the desk, rested her palm on the lid, and said, "Elise, I think you should know how long my brother has been carrying your words." What she showed me were letters, old cream envelopes, parish stationery, copies kept from a grief correspondence program at St. Anne's that paired mourners who did not know each other's names. 8 years earlier, after my father died suddenly and while my mother was beginning her long decline, I had written letters there because speaking honestly to strangers seemed easier than burdening the living. Across from my letters were responses from a widower identified only by initials. His wife had died after a long illness. He wrote with grave tenderness, careful wit, and a disciplined loneliness. I sat down because my knees ceased to belong to me. "No," I said, though the handwriting had already answered. Victor did not deny it. He stood at the window with both hands behind his back, as if he would rather take a bullet than watch recognition move across my face. Teresa opened another folder and withdrew my final letter, the one where I had written that maybe someday I wanted a house where silence felt peaceful rather than lonely. The exact phrase from the library. "He knew," I whispered. From the first day at the station, he knew. Victor turned then. "I recognized your name when Teresa told me who had been hired," he said. "I intended to tell you before anything between us changed." I stared at him, anger and grief colliding so hard I could not separate them. "But you still met my bus already knowing me." He said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Teresa, standing just to my left, spoke gently into the wound. "He did not orchestrate your arrival, Elise, but once he knew, he couldn't pretend indifference. It might have been meant as comfort. It landed like confirmation. Here is the question I wish someone had forced into my hands right then. If the man you love knows your oldest grief before you have chosen to give it to him, is that intimacy, or is it theft dressed in tenderness? Tell me in the comments what you would have called it, because in that moment I could not tell the difference. I left the hotel office and walked until my lungs hurt, ending up at Margaret's cottage. I would like to say I marched back to Victor and demanded the whole truth that night. Instead, I did what many sensible women do when pain strikes the place where old pain already lives. I withdrew into competence. I reviewed invoices, inspected plaster, and arranged my face into something professional. Victor respected the distance so completely that it enraged me. He did not corner me. He did not use grief or desire to plead his case. The same restraint that had made me trust him now felt like abandonment. Teresa found me the following afternoon in the hotel laundry corridor, where no one ever lingered long. She carried folded towels like a woman on an ordinary errand. "My brother will not defend himself if he believes you need freedom," she said. "It is one of the few ways he can be foolish." I looked at her, exhausted and raw. "Do you think what he did was foolish?" Her expression shifted with something almost maternal. "I think he loved your letters before he loved your face," she said. "Lonely men can confuse gratitude, grief, and destiny." That sentence lodged in me like shrapnel. Loved your letters before he loved your face. It made our entire romance wobble under a new light. Had I become the living continuation of a private correspondence he had cherished for years? Had he loved me, or the version of me he had constructed from words written by a younger, lonelier woman? Teresa never lied outright. She merely set the sharpest possible interpretation in front of me and let my own fears pick it up. That was enough. Sometimes enough is more destructive than outright deceit. Later, I learned she was just as precise with him. At the time, I knew only what she told me over the next 2 days. That Victor was ashamed, that he believed he had already crossed a line that might make any future with me impossible, and that pressing me to stay would prove the worst things I might suspect about his need for control. "If you choose to leave Bellwether," she said, folding another towel with those steady hands, "he will stand aside. It will break him, but he will do it. He believes love without respect is only appetite. There are truths crueler than lies because they sound noble." I went to Victor's house once more before deciding. He was in Cecilia's garden, sleeves rolled, hands bare in the cold as he cleared winter debris from the stone border. I watched him for a full minute before he noticed me. When he did, hope rose in his face so briefly that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. "Elise," he said. I had rehearsed anger. Instead, what came out was exhaustion. "Why didn't you tell me at the station?" He set the rake aside with great care. "Because seeing you there felt impossible," he said, "and because selfishness reached me before honesty did." I waited for more. He gave it. "Then, each day you were here, I told myself I would explain before I asked anything of you. But life with you became the thing by which I measured all my remaining courage, and I delayed until delay became its own betrayal." It was the clearest, bravest thing he had said. It should have saved us. Instead, I heard only the part that confirmed my worst fear. He had known, and he had still let me walk into love without full light. "I don't know what was mine," I said. His face changed as if I had struck him. "It was all yours," he answered at once. "Every day after the bus, every choice, every kindness. Elise, whatever began in memory became something else because of you, not because of grief." I wanted desperately to believe him. That was the trouble. Wanting belief is not the same as being capable of it. I looked toward Cecilia's garden, the one he had kept half alive and half abandoned, and saw too clearly how faithful he could be to old feeling. "Maybe you deserve a life not built on another person's unfinished sorrow," I said. He went completely still. He did not argue the way I secretly wanted him to. He did not say, "Stay, and I choose you now, and the past is only a path, not a prison." Instead, he lowered his eyes for one terrible second. Then he lifted them again with that grave tenderness I had once mistaken for safety. "If leaving is what lets you keep yourself intact," he said, "I will not make staying harder." I nearly hated him for that. Respect can feel beautiful when you are choosing love. It feels like exile when you are begging, silently, to be asked twice. I packed that night. The same suitcase I had brought from Chicago lay open on my bed, and every folded sweater felt like an accusation. Margaret came up after supper and sat beside the window while I worked. "You love him," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." "Then why are you leaving?" I kept folding. "Because I know what happens when a woman becomes the center beam holding up someone else's private ruin." Margaret looked at me for a long time. "Maybe," she said carefully, "you are mistaking being cherished for being used." I could not bear the possibility that she was right. At dawn, Teresa drove me to the station because the roads were slick, and she said Victor had business with men from Pittsburgh. I believed her because I wanted to. The town looked blurred and unfinished through the iced car window. As we passed the hotel, I saw the new ramp, the restored front lanterns, the trimmed porch rails, all the evidence of months spent making a place more hospitable to frailty. Bellwether had started as a job and become something perilously close to home. That was why leaving felt not clean, but surgical. The station looked exactly as it had on the morning I arrived. Bare bench, pale sky, weak coffee smell drifting from the machine inside. Teresa carried my smaller case onto the curb and touched my arm. "He does love you," she said quietly. "That is why he won't come if he thinks his presence would pressure you." I nodded because my throat had closed. She kissed my cheek and drove away. I stood there with my ticket in my glove, feeling as though everyone in Bellwether had quietly stepped back to see whether I would save myself or abandon myself, and I no longer knew which was which. Then I heard a car door shut behind me. I turned, and there he was, not 5 yards away, coat unbuttoned against the wind, no hat, no gloves, as if he had come in such haste that weather had not entered the calculation. For one instant, relief flooded me so hard I thought I might fall. He had come. Whatever Teresa said, whatever I had told myself, he had come. But he stopped at the respectful distance and did not close it. His face held such controlled pain that I understood at once. He believed coming at all was already a trespass. "Elise," he said. My name sounded the way a house sounds after someone has moved out of it. I wanted to ask the one question that mattered. Did you choose me, or did you only recognize me? Did you wait for me because of who I had been on paper, or because of who I had become standing beside you in Bellwether? Instead, I said the smaller, more cowardly thing. "You didn't have to come." A shadow crossed his expression. "Yes," he answered. "I did." But still he did not step closer. The bus rounded the bend then, yellow lights dull in the morning mist, and panic rose in me because time had become a blade. If you had been standing where I stood with that ticket in your hand, would you have asked the question that could save everything? Or would pride, fear, and old injury have sent you onto the bus? I still do not know whether silence was my failure or my final defense. Victor looked at my suitcase and then back at me, as if memorizing both. "Teresa told me you wanted freedom from any further explanation," he said carefully, as if each word had edges. "I am trying to honor that." My heart lurched so violently I almost spoke the truth right there. But his choice of words confirmed what I thought I knew. He was honoring departure, not fighting for future. "And I was told," I said, because pain makes fools of the articulate, "that you understood why I couldn't stay." His face went white in a way I had never seen. "If staying would cost you peace," he said, "I would never ask it." There it was, the tragedy in one line. He thought love meant release. I thought love meant he would cross the last distance if I mattered beyond memory. The bus doors folded open. The driver took my bag. Victor's hands flexed once at his sides and then stilled. I searched his face for rebellion, some sign that all his discipline had finally failed him where I was concerned. Instead, I saw only devastation held upright by will. I climbed the steps because I believed if he truly chose me, he would stop me. He believed if he truly loved me, He would not. I took the seat by the window. He stood on the platform exactly where he had stood the first morning, except then he had been the mystery waiting for my arrival, and now he was the answer I had failed to claim. As the bus pulled away, he did not wave. He simply kept looking at me with a grief so private and absolute that only later did I understand it. A man does not wear that face for a woman he merely remembers. He wears it for a woman he has just lost in the present tense. I rented a small apartment in another Pennsylvania town 2 weeks later and told myself solitude had been the mature choice. Work came. Old buildings always need saving. I restored a library annex, then a train depot office, then a row house with plaster medallions hidden under acoustic tile. I learned the routes of new streets and the hours of a new grocery store. The hotel renovation continued according to my plans, down to the gentler porch grade and the armrests in the reading lounge for arthritic hands. Margaret mailed me photographs without commentary, as if she understood that explanation can sometimes insult grief. In every picture, Bellwether looked both improved and lonelier. Spring came late. One morning I found myself buying birdseed at a hardware store I had no reason to enter. By afternoon I had fixed a feeder outside my kitchen window. When the first cardinal landed there, scarlet against new leaves, I sat down very abruptly. I told myself I was honoring my mother. That was true, but incomplete. Victor had made the bird into a language between loss and comfort, and now that language followed me even where he did not. Love has a cruel afterlife in the habits it leaves behind. The final truth reached the audience long before it reached either of us. Weeks after I left, Teresa unlocked a cabinet in the parish archive and drew out the original correspondence files from St. Anne's grief program. Her signature appeared on the volunteer pairing sheets from 8 years earlier. She had matched my letters with Victor's after reading enough to recognize two people stranded in compatible silences. Years later, when applications for the Bellwether Restoration Post crossed her desk, she recognized my name at once and quietly moved my file to the final round. She did not invent my qualifications. She merely guided where they landed. There was more. In her desk diary, beneath luncheon notes and parish reminders, she had written the date of my arrival, the bus number, and the line, "Call Victor yourself. If he meets her, it will be honest from the beginning in feeling, if not in explanation." Another page, weeks later, carried a darker note after she realized how deeply he had changed. If he leaves the organization, everything fractures. He is gentler with her than he has been with anyone since Cecilia. This cannot continue unless she understands the cost. Teresa had not forged evidence, threatened anyone, or spoken one grand villain's speech. She had simply arranged reality into a blade and trusted character to do the rest. When she saw that Victor intended not just affection, but a different future, fear overcame mercy. She told me enough truth to make trust impossible. She told him enough truth to make restraint seem righteous. She understood both of us perfectly. My terror of becoming responsible for another person's entire emotional survival. His terror of using love like leverage. She turned our best qualities into weapons against us and never needed to lie at the center of the matter. That was why the damage held. We each completed it with our own decency. That summer, Victor restored Cecilia's garden completely, but did not redesign it beyond recognition. He cleared the dead growth, reset the pathstones, and added a bench facing the lake, because I had once said sorrow is easier beside water. He kept one lamp burning in the front window every evening, not as an invitation, but as a habit formed from something I had told him on a cold night, that a lit house feels less empty when someone you love is traveling home. He had listened to that too. Of course he had. As for me, I continued making old places habitable for people who feared being discarded. I grew better at it. That was the bitter joke. I could return dignity to wood, stone, plaster, and paint, yet I had abandoned the one conversation that might have restored dignity to love. Some evenings I stood at my own sink watching the cardinal feeder sway, and wondered whether Victor was eating supper alone, whether Pip still trotted after his long, dark coat, whether the hotel porch sounded different under the feet of guests who would never know what had been paid. If this story stays with you, like this video and subscribe, because some love stories are not warnings against loving late in life. They are warnings against letting fear speak more fluently than truth. And tell me this, if one honest question could have saved the life you wanted, would you ask it even if the answer might break you? I never stopped loving Victor Sorelli. He never stopped loving me. Neither of us replaced the other with someone easier, safer, or newer. The world would call that tragic devotion. I think it was simply unfinished speech. He believed I left because loving him had become another burden I could not survive. I believed he let me go because I was never truly his future. Only his remembered solace returned in living form. We were both wrong, and wrongness can settle into a life as quietly as dust. What destroys me even now is this. The title event was real, but it was never the whole story. I did take a bus to a town where no one was supposed to know me. A mafia boss really was waiting there. Yet the danger was not that he meant me harm. The danger was that he had recognized me long before I was ready to be recognized, and that when the truth finally came, two decent people loved each other enough to make the exact merciful choices that ruined them. One honest question could have saved us. Neither of us asked it.